Marcus Rivera was exactly 7 minutes late picking up his daughter from after-school care, which meant he'd be charged the extra $15 he didn't have in his account until Friday. He knew this because it had happened twice already this month, and the woman at the front desk had started giving him that look. The one that said she felt sorry for him but couldn't make exceptions. Not even for the quiet single dad who always apologized too much. He pushed through the doors of Bright Horizons Learning Center, with his tie loosened and his shirt collar damp with sweat despite the December cold. The fluorescent lights made everything look harsh and tired, including his own reflection in the glass door. 34 years old and he looked 40. That's what 3 years of surviving instead of living will do to you. Lily was the last child there, sitting cross-legged on the reading carpet with a picture book open in her lap, her dark curls falling forward as she traced the words with one small finger. 7 years old and already reading 2 grades above her level, already so much like her mother, it made his chest ache every time he looked at her. She glanced up when she heard his footsteps, and her whole face transformed into a smile that somehow made the late fee worth every penny. "Daddy." She scrambled up, leaving the book open on the carpet, and ran to him. He caught her in his arms and lifted her up even though she was getting too big for it. Even though his back had been hurting since he'd spent 9 hours hunched over spreadsheets in his cubicle at Hartwell Industries. "Sorry I'm late, sweetheart," he murmured into her hair. She smelled like crayons and the strawberry shampoo they bought in bulk at the discount store. "It's okay. Mrs. Patterson let me feed the class hamster." Lily pulled back to look at him with those serious brown eyes, Sarah's eyes. "He ate 4 sunflower seeds. I counted." Marcus set her down and took her hand, grabbing her backpack with the other. He signed the late pickup sheet, avoiding eye contact with the woman at the desk as he did every time, and led Lily out into the parking lot where their 10-year-old Honda waited under a broken streetlight. The car had been Sarah's. He still hadn't changed the registration. The drive home took 20 minutes through the gray December evening, past houses already decorated with Christmas lights that made their own neighborhood look even more worn down by comparison. Lily chattered about her day, about the hamster, about her friend Emma's upcoming birthday party they probably couldn't afford to buy a present for, about the Christmas concert at school where her class was singing Jingle Bells. Marcus made the right sounds at the right moments, but part of his mind was already on tomorrow, on the meeting he knew was coming, on the stack of reports he'd have to finish before the holiday shutdown. Their apartment was on the 3rd floor of a building that had been nice, maybe 20 years ago. Now it was just tired, like everything else in Marcus's life. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a kitchen barely big enough to turn around in. But it was theirs, and it was clean, and Lily had never known anything different. That was something, at least. While Lily settled at the kitchen table to start her homework, Marcus microwaved leftovers from 2 nights ago, spaghetti that had seen better days but would fill their stomachs. He'd learned to stretch meals, to make a rotisserie chicken last 5 days, to buy the day-old bread in the dented cans. You learned a lot of things when your wife died and left you with a 4-year-old and medical bills that would take a decade to pay off. He'd been a different person back then, hard to remember sometimes. He'd been in his 2nd year of a music performance degree at the State University, studying classical voice, dreaming about opera houses and concert halls. Then Sarah got pregnant, and suddenly those dreams became irresponsible fantasies. She'd wanted to keep the baby. They'd both wanted to keep the baby, and that meant Marcus needed to provide. So he dropped out, taken an entry-level position in the accounting department at Hartwell Industries, told himself it was temporary. Temporary had lasted 7 years and counting. Sarah had gotten sick when Lily was 4, stage 3 breast cancer, aggressive, the kind that showed up in young women sometimes for no reason at all. They'd fought it for 18 months, surgery, chemo, radiation, more chemo. Marcus had watched his wife disappear by degrees, had held her hand through treatments that made her violently ill, had sung to her in hospital rooms when she couldn't sleep. He'd sung at her funeral too. Barely made it through Ave Maria before his voice cracked completely, and his sister had to finish for him. He hadn't sung since, not really. Sometimes he'd hum to Lily at bedtime, but that was different. The part of him that made music had died with Sarah, buried under grief and exhaustion, and the sheer weight of single parenthood. At work the next morning, the office buzzed with an energy Marcus usually tried to ignore. It was mid-December, which meant the annual Christmas dinner was coming, the biggest social event on Hartwell Industries' corporate calendar. A black tie affair at the Grandview Hotel ballroom, where CEO Victoria Hartwell held court like a queen among her executives and board members. Marcus had never attended. The ticket price alone was prohibitive. and the thought of putting on a tuxedo he didn't own to make small talk with people who barely knew his name made him want to disappear into his cubicle and never emerge. Victoria Hartwell was a legend in the company, and not always in a good way. At 40 years old, she'd taken over her father's business 8 years ago and transformed it from a regional player into a national powerhouse. She was brilliant, ruthless, beautiful in a way that made you nervous to look directly at her. The employees called her the Ice Queen when they thought no one was listening. Marcus had seen her maybe 3 times in person, always from a distance, always surrounded by executives in expensive suits. She existed in a different universe than his. The morning meeting was supposed to be routine quarterly results, year-end procedures, the usual corporate announcements. Marcus sat in a back row of the conference room with the other accounting clerks, trying to look attentive while his mind wandered to the grocery list he needed to make, the permission slip he needed to sign for Lily's field trip, the electric bill that was due next week. Then Victoria Hartwell walked into the room. She never came to these meetings. That was what her vice presidents were for. But there she was, wearing a charcoal suit that probably cost more than Marcus's monthly rent, her blonde hair pulled back in a way that made her look even more intimidating. The room went quiet instantly. Even the managers straightened in their chairs. "Good morning," she said, her voice cool and controlled. "I won't take up much of your time. I wanted to personally extend an invitation to all of you for this year's Christmas dinner. We've had record profits, and I believe in celebrating our success as a team." The word team sounded strange coming from someone who'd laid off 40 people in September. Victoria continued, detailing the event, the date, the venue, the dress code. Marcus was already mentally checking out, already planning his polite decline if anyone asked why he wasn't attending when he heard his own name. Marcus Rivera. His head snapped up. Every person in the room turned to look at him. His face went hot. Victoria was looking directly at him now, and there was something in her expression he couldn't read. "I understand you have a background in music, vocal performance, is that correct?" Marcus's mouth went dry. How did she know that? Who had told her? He managed to nod. Wonderful. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "I think it would be lovely to have some live entertainment at the dinner this year. Something more personal than our usual hired performers. Would you be willing to sing for us? Consider it a special showcase of our company's diverse talents." The room was completely silent. Marcus felt like he was falling. This wasn't an invitation. This was a command performance, delivered in front of witnesses so he couldn't refuse. This was the CEO of a Fortune 500 company, turning him into entertainment, into a curiosity, the struggling single dad from accounting who used to have dreams of being a singer. If you're feeling the weight of this moment, please hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about everyday people facing extraordinary challenges. Several of his coworkers were staring at their hands. Others looked uncomfortable. His supervisor, Janet, had her lips pressed together in a thin line. Everyone understood what was happening here, but no one was going to say it out loud. Marcus's voice came out rough. He cleared his throat. "I haven't performed in years, Miss Hartwell. I'm not sure I'd be—" "Nonsense." Victoria's tone was pleasant, but there was steel underneath. "I'm sure you're being modest. It'll be wonderful. My assistant will send you the details. Thank you all for your time." She left the room before Marcus could form another protest. The moment the door closed behind her, conversations erupted in whispers. Marcus sat frozen in his chair, his heart pounding, feeling like he'd just been volunteered to walk a plank. Janet caught up with him in the hallway afterward. She was in her 50s, had worked at Hartwell for 20 years, and was one of the few people who'd been kind to Marcus when Sarah died. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "I don't know how she found out about your music background. Someone must have mentioned it." "It's fine." It wasn't fine. "I'll figure something out. You could call in sick that night." "And lose my job?" Marcus shook his head. "I can't afford that." Janet squeezed his shoulder. "For what it's worth, I think you'll be great. I remember you mentioning once that you used to sing. I bet you're better than you think." Marcus smiled weakly and escaped to his cubicle, where he stared at his computer screen without seeing it for the next hour. His hands were shaking. The thought of standing in front of hundreds of people, of singing in front of Victoria Hartwell and her executive circle, made him want to throw up. They were expecting him to fail. That's what this was. Entertainment at his expense. The amusing spectacle of the little guy trying to be something more than he was. That evening, Lily could tell something was wrong the moment he picked her up. She held his hand extra tight on the walk to the car and didn't talk as much as usual. When they got home and he started making dinner chicken nuggets and frozen vegetables, nothing fancy, she climbed onto the kitchen counter to watch him with those serious eyes. "Did something bad happen at work, Daddy?" Marcus looked at her, at this small person who depended on him for everything, who'd already lost so much in her short life. He couldn't burden her with his humiliation. "No, sweetheart, just a long day, Mrs. the Lang Day. Patterson says my class gets to sing at the Christmas concert. Will you come watch?" "Of course I will." He managed a real smile then. "I wouldn't miss it." After dinner and homework and bath time, while Lily was putting on her pajamas, she called out from her room, "Daddy, can you help me find something?" He found her dragging a cardboard box from the back of her closet, a box he'd packed away 2 years ago and hoped she wouldn't find. Inside were photo albums from before Sarah got sick, from the early years of their marriage. Lily opened one and immediately found what she was looking for, a picture of Marcus from when he was 22, performing at some small venue he didn't even remember the name of anymore. He was wearing all black, standing in stage lights, his eyes closed as he sang. He looked young and full of dreams, looked like a completely different person. "Is this you?" Lily asked, wonder in her voice. "Yeah, baby, long time ago. You look like a movie star." She flipped through more pages, finding other photos Marcus in recitals, in choir performances, in the university's opera production of La Boheme. "Mommy told me you used to sing. She said you were really good." Marcus's throat tightened. "Did she?" "She said your voice was what made her fall in love with you." Lily looked up at him. "Can you still sing?" "I don't know." It was the most honest answer he could give. That night, after he tucked Lily in and turned off her light, Marcus stood in the bathroom looking at his reflection in the medicine cabinet mirror. He hadn't really looked at himself in years, had just gone through the motions. The man staring back at him looked tired and defeated, looked like someone who'd forgotten how to want anything beyond survival. He opened his mouth and tried to make sound, tried to find the voice he'd buried 3 years ago. It came out thin and uncertain, cracking on the first note. He tried again, pushing more air, reaching for the training he'd had in university. Better, but still wrong, still full of rust and grief and years of silence. He gave up after a few minutes and went to his own bedroom, where a framed photo of Sarah sat on his nightstand. It was from their wedding day, both of them young and laughing, her white dress simple but beautiful, his rental tux slightly too big. They'd been so happy, so stupid in their happiness, not knowing what was coming. His phone buzzed with an email notification. It was from Victoria Hartwell's assistant, sent to him personally at 9:30 at night. The subject line read, "Christmas dinner performance details." Marcus opened it with a sense of dread. The message was brief and professional, confirming his performance slot between the main course and dessert, suggesting he prepare something appropriate for the season and the venue, and noting that Ms. Hartwell is looking forward to your contribution to the evening's festivities. The last line felt like a subtle mockery, a reminder that this wasn't really about him at all. He was a prop in Victoria Hartwell's perfect corporate Christmas, the amusing distraction before dessert. Marcus set his phone down and picked up Sarah's photo instead. She'd believed in him once, back when belief seemed possible. She'd sat through his recitals and his practices, had told him his voice was a gift, had made him promise that someday he'd sing again after Lily was grown, after he could afford to chase those old dreams. She hadn't lived to see him break that promise. Maybe that was a mercy. But he'd stood in front of her casket and sung Ave Maria, or tried to, and even through his tears, she'd deserved better than what he'd been able to give her that day. If he was going to be humiliated at Victoria Hartwell's Christmas dinner, if he was going to fail in front of hundreds of people, maybe he could at least try to do it in a way that honored Sarah's memory. Maybe he could stand on that stage and sing the way he used to sing for her, in their tiny apartment, when Lily was sleeping and the world was quiet and love was the only thing that mattered. He didn't know if his voice would come back. He didn't know if he could do this without falling apart. But looking at Sarah's photo, at that smile that had sustained him through everything, Marcus made himself a quiet promise. He would try. For her. For the man he used to be. For the daughter who still believed her father could be something more than invisible. Even if it destroyed him, he would try. The night of the Christmas dinner arrived like an execution date Marcus had been counting down to with equal parts dread and resignation. He'd spent 2 weeks trying to practice in stolen moments in his car during lunch breaks, in the shower before Lily woke up, once at midnight in the apartment stairwell where no one could hear him crack and strain on notes that used to come effortlessly. His voice was rusty, unpredictable, breaking in places it shouldn't. Some days he could barely get through a scale without his throat closing up with emotion. Other days he found fragments of what he used to be, glimpses of the training and talent that had once made professors tell him he could go professional. He'd chosen "Oh Holy Night" because it was the song he'd sung to Sarah in the hospital 3 days before she died, when she was too weak to speak, but tears had run down her face as she listened. It felt like the only choice that mattered, even if it also felt like ripping his chest open in front of strangers. Mrs. Chen from the apartment next door had agreed to watch Lily for the evening. She was 72, a widow herself, and had become something like family over the past 3 years. When Marcus knocked on her door at 6:30 in his only suit, a black one he'd bought for Sarah's funeral and hadn't worn since, now hanging slightly loose on his frame from stress weight loss, Lily grabbed him in a fierce hug. "You look handsome, Daddy," she whispered. Then she pulled back and looked at him with those serious brown eyes. "Sing like you used to sing to Mommy, she'll hear you." Marcus's vision blurred. He blinked hard and kissed the top of her head. "I'll try, sweetheart." "You'll be amazing," Mrs. Chen said, squeezing his arm. "Now go. Show them what you're made of." The drive to the Grandview Hotel took 30 minutes through streets glittering with Christmas decorations. Marcus's hands were sweating on the steering wheel. His heart hadn't stopped racing since he'd woken up that morning. Part of him still wanted to turn around, to call in sick, to protect himself from the humiliation he knew was coming. But Lily believed in him. And somewhere, in whatever came after death, maybe Sarah was watching. He couldn't let them down, even if he let himself down. The hotel parking lot was full of expensive cars. BMWs and Mercedes, and even a few Teslas that probably cost more than Marcus made in 3 years. He parked his old Honda in the far corner, feeling like an imposter before he'd even walked through the doors. His suit felt wrong, looked wrong, marked him as someone who didn't belong here. But he'd pressed it carefully, shined his only pair of dress shoes, and he held his head up as he walked across the parking lot, even though everything in him wanted to disappear. The ballroom was breathtaking. Crystal chandeliers hung from a vaulted ceiling, casting warm light over round tables draped in white linen and decorated with elaborate centerpieces of pine branches, white roses, and gold ribbons. There had to be 200 people already there, maybe more, all of them dressed like they'd stepped out of a magazine. The men wore tuxedos that actually fit. The women wore gowns that caught the light. Champagne flowed from a fountain near the bar. A string quartet played softly in one corner. Marcus found his assigned seat at a table near the back table, 18, far from the main stage where Victoria Hartwell would hold court. He recognized a few of his coworkers from accounting, others from different departments he'd never spoken to. They nodded politely, but didn't engage him in conversation. Everyone here understood the hierarchy, understood that Marcus was entertainment tonight, not a peer. From his seat, he could see the executive table at the front of the room. Victoria Hartwell sat at its center like a queen presiding over her kingdom. She wore a black evening gown that was somehow both elegant and severe, her blonde hair swept up, diamond earrings catching the light. She was laughing at something a board member said, her whole presence commanding attention even across the crowded room. Marcus had never seen anyone look more untouchable, more perfectly in control. The contrast between her world and his had never felt sharper. She would live her entire life without ever worrying about late pickup fees or past due utility bills. She would never understand what it meant to choose between fixing your car and buying your daughter new shoes. And tonight she'd pulled him into her orbit for amusement, for the entertainment value of watching the struggling single dad from accounting try to be something more than invisible. Dinner was served in courses: salad with pears and goat cheese, filet mignon with truffle butter, roasted vegetables. Marcus couldn't name. He barely tasted any of it. His stomach was in knots. He watched the room, watched people laugh and network and celebrate, and felt completely separate from all of it. He was backstage at his own execution, waiting for his cue. After the main course, after the dessert plates had been cleared, Victoria took the microphone at the front of the room. The conversations quieted. She thanked everyone for coming, talked about the company's record-breaking year, announced bonuses and promotions that made people applaud. She was a natural speaker, confident and charismatic, and Marcus understood why she'd built an empire. She made people believe in her vision, made them want to follow her anywhere. Then her tone shifted, became more casual, almost playful. "Before we close out the evening, we have a special treat. One of our own has a hidden talent that I thought deserved to be shared." Marcus's heart stopped. This was it. Marcus Rivera from our accounting department has graciously agreed to perform for us tonight. Marcus studied music performance and has a background in classical voice, and I, for one, am thrilled to hear what he can do. The applause was polite, expectant, but Marcus could feel the undercurrent. People were curious in the way you're curious about a car accident, wondering how bad it would be, already bracing for awkwardness. He saw some of the executives at Victoria's table exchange glances, saw a few barely suppressed smirks. They were expecting a disaster, something they could laugh about tomorrow over morning coffee. Marcus stood on shaking legs and made his way to the small stage that had been set up at the front of the room. Every step felt like walking through water. The room was too bright, too big, too full of people who saw him as nothing. He climbed the 3 steps to the stage and approached the microphone stand, his hands trembling as he adjusted it to his height. Feedback squealed through the speakers. A few people laughed. Marcus's face burned. He gripped the microphone stand to steady himself and looked out at the sea of faces. 200 people watching him, waiting for him to fail. He found Victoria in the crowd. She was watching him with that cool, appraising expression, the hint of a smile on her lips. This was what she'd wanted. This moment of power, of control, of putting someone in their place while pretending to give them opportunity. Marcus closed his eyes. He thought about walking off the stage, about ending this humiliation before it truly began. But then he thought about Sarah in that hospital bed, her hands so thin in his, her eyes closed as he sang to her. He thought about Lily whispering that Mommy would hear him. He thought about the man in those old photographs, the one who'd believed his voice mattered. If you're feeling this moment with him, please hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about courage in the face of impossible odds. Marcus took a breath, deeper than he'd breathed in 3 years. He felt his diaphragm expand, felt his training come back like muscle memory. And then he opened his mouth and began to sing. O holy night, the stars are brightly shining. It is the night of our dear Savior's birth. His voice started soft, almost uncertain, but clear, pure. The room went quiet immediately, conversation stopping mid-sentence. He opened his eyes and kept singing, pushing more air, letting his voice grow stronger with each phrase. Long lay the world in sin and error pining, till he appeared and the soul felt its worth. The notes were coming now, flowing from some place he'd locked away 3 years ago. His classical training was returning, the breath control, the placement, the way to shape vowels and sustain phrases that turned words into emotion. This wasn't the voice of a grieving father singing at his wife's funeral. This was the voice of someone who'd spent years learning to make sound into art. A thrill of hope, the weary world rejoices, for yonder breaks a new and glorious morn. Around the ballroom, people had gone completely still. Champagne glasses paused halfway to lips. Conversations died completely. Even the waitstaff stopped moving, standing frozen along the walls. The string quartet in the corner had put down their instruments to listen. Fall on your knees, oh, hear the angel voices. Marcus let his voice open fully on these lines, pouring everything into them. 3 years of grief, of exhaustion, of loving his daughter through impossible circumstances, of waking up every day and choosing to survive. His voice filled the ballroom with a power and beauty that seemed impossible from someone so ordinary, someone who shuffled through the accounting department in worn shirts and kept his head down. O night divine, O night when Christ was born, O night divine, O night divine. The final sustained note seemed to hang in the air, impossible and perfect, held longer than should have been humanly possible. When it finally faded, there was absolute silence. Not a breath, not a movement. The room had been transformed into something sacred. Then someone started clapping, a single pair of hands breaking the spell. Within seconds, the entire ballroom erupted. People rose to their feet. The applause was thunderous, overwhelming, genuine. Marcus opened his eyes, disoriented, barely processing what was happening. Some people were wiping tears from their faces. Others were staring at him like they were seeing him for the first time, like the invisible man from accounting had suddenly become visible in a way that shattered every assumption they'd made about him. Marcus looked for Victoria. She was still seated at the executive table, but her expression had completely changed. The cool mask of control was gone. She was staring at him with something like shock, her mouth slightly open, and there were tears running down her face, real tears, streaming over her carefully applied makeup, destroying her perfect composure. Her hands gripped the edge of the table like she was trying to anchor herself to something solid. The applause continued, but Marcus couldn't stay on that stage another second. He was shaking, overwhelmed, barely holding himself together. He stepped away from the microphone and quickly descended the stairs, heading for the nearest exit. People tried to stop him, to congratulate him, but he pushed through politely, desperately, needing air and silence and space to process what had just happened. He found himself in a quiet hallway outside the ballroom, leaning against a wall, breathing hard. His hands were still trembling from adrenaline and emotion. He'd just exposed himself completely in front of 200 people, had opened up the most vulnerable parts of himself for their judgment, and somehow and possibly they'd received it as something beautiful. He heard footsteps and looked up to see Victoria Hartwell walking toward him. She'd composed herself somewhat, but her eyes were still red, mascara slightly smudged. She grabbed a cloth napkin from somewhere and was clutching it in one hand. When she reached him, she stopped a few feet away, uncertain in a way he'd never imagined someone like her could be uncertain. "I had no idea," she said quietly. Her voice was different now, softer, stripped of its usual authority. "I thought you could carry a tune. I thought it would be pleasant background entertainment. I had no idea you could sing like that." Marcus didn't know what to say. His throat was still tight with emotion. Victoria looked down at the napkin in her hands. "My younger brother was a musician, a pianist, incredibly talented. He used to play in competitions, dreamed of performing at Carnegie Hall." She paused, and when she continued, her voice was barely above a whisper. "He died 5 years ago. Car accident. He was 28. Marcus's anger at her, at this whole humiliating setup, began to crack. "I'm sorry. He used to play while I sang. Just at home, nothing professional. But Oh Holy Night was his favorite. He'd play it every Christmas." Victoria finally looked up at him, and her eyes were full of pain she'd clearly spent years hiding. "I haven't heard it since his funeral. I can't listen to it without falling apart. And tonight, when you started singing, I almost left the room. But then I heard your voice, and I couldn't move. It was like he was there again." They stood in that hallway, two strangers who'd just discovered they'd both been performing different versions of survival, both hiding grief behind carefully constructed walls. "I became the Ice Queen after he died," Victoria continued, and there was bitter humor in how she said the nickname Marcus had only heard in whispers. "I threw myself into the company, into being ruthless and untouchable, because if I felt anything, I'd break completely. I've spent 5 years making sure no one sees me as weak." She laughed, but it was hollow. "And then you sang that song and I couldn't hold it together. Everyone in that room saw me cry." "I'm sorry," Marcus said again. "I didn't know. If I'd known, no." Victoria shook her head firmly. "Don't apologize. I needed to hear it. I needed to remember that grief doesn't make you weak, that feeling things doesn't mean you're falling apart." She was quiet for a moment. "Why did you stop singing? You're extraordinary." Marcus looked away, down the long empty hallway. "My wife got pregnant when we were in college. I dropped out to support us. Then she got sick and died 3 years ago, and I haven't been able to sing since, not really. Tonight was the first time I've performed since her funeral." "The first time?" Victoria looked stunned. "You sang like that after 3 years of silence?" "I sang like that because of 3 years of silence." Marcus met her eyes. "Everything I couldn't say, couldn't feel, couldn't survive, if I let myself acknowledge, it all came out in that song. I was singing for my wife, for my daughter who believes in me even when I don't believe in myself, for the person I used to be before I had to become invisible just to survive." Victoria was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was businesslike, but not cold. "There's a position opening in the company after the new year. Senior Communications and Community Outreach Coordinator. It would involve public speaking, representing the company at events, connecting with stakeholders. The salary is $95,000 plus benefits." Marcus's heart stuttered. That was nearly double what he made now. That was Lily in a better school, a bigger apartment, not choosing between fixing the car and buying groceries. "I'm offering it to you," Victoria continued. "Not because I feel guilty, and not as charity. Because tonight you showed me something I'd forgotten. That vulnerability and strength aren't opposites. That the ability to move people, to make them feel something real, is rarer and more valuable than most skills." She pulled a business card from somewhere and handed it to him. "Think about it. After the holidays, call my assistant and we'll discuss details." Marcus took the card with shaking hands. "Why are you doing this?" "Because my brother would have loved your voice. Because I've spent 5 years being afraid to feel anything, and you just reminded me what it costs to live that way." Victoria managed a small, sad smile. "And because someone who can survive what you've survived and still sing like that deserves a chance to be more than invisible. She turned to leave, then paused. Thank you, Marcus, for tonight. For giving me my brother back, even if just for a few minutes. Marcus watched her walk back toward the ballroom, her shoulders straight again, her armor rebuilding itself with each step. But he'd seen what was underneath now, and he suspected she'd seen the same in him. He left the hotel through a side entrance, not ready to face the congratulations or questions or attention. The cold December air felt sharp and clean after the overheated ballroom. He sat in his old Honda for a long time, holding Victoria's business card, trying to process everything that had happened. Then he drove home to his daughter. Mrs. Chen met him at the door. She wouldn't go to sleep, she whispered. She wanted to wait for you. Marcus found Lily in her bed, fighting to keep her eyes open. When she saw him, she sat up, suddenly alert. How did it go? Did you sing like you used to? He sat on the edge of her bed and pulled her into his arms. Yes, baby, I sang like I used to. Did Mommy hear you? Marcus thought about the tears streaming down Victoria Hartwell's face, about 200 people rising to their feet, about finding his voice again after 3 years of silence. Yeah, sweetheart, I think she did. Lily smiled and settled back against her pillow, satisfied. I told you she would. I told you you'd be amazing. After she drifted off to sleep, Marcus sat in the quiet apartment and thought about how a single moment of vulnerability could crack open carefully constructed walls. How he and Victoria Hartwell had both walked into that ballroom carrying grief they thought they had to hide, performing strength they didn't feel, and how music and truth had given them both permission to be human again. Sometimes the tests that seem cruelest become unexpected gifts. Sometimes the voice we're most afraid to use is the one that changes everything. And sometimes being seen truly, seen in all your brokenness and survival, is the first step toward becoming whole again. Marcus looked at Sarah's photo on his nightstand and whispered a promise. He would take the job. He would give Lily the life she deserved. He would stop being invisible, stop hiding the parts of himself that hurt too much to acknowledge. It wouldn't be easy. The grief would still be there. But tonight, he'd learned that grief could become something beautiful when you let it speak, when you stopped trying to bury it, and instead gave it a voice. He'd learned that survival wasn't the same as living, and maybe, finally, it was time to start living again.